This video is powered by Ground News. I remember just like 3 days after winning Hungary's election, Péter Magyar walked into the presidential palace to meet President Tamás Sulyok, an Orbán-era appointee. And while he was there, he basically said, this guy needs to go. Now, obviously, Sulyok wasn't particularly amused and said no, but yeah, obviously that also did not derail Magyar. Because yesterday, in a massive moment, Magyar used his new 2/3 majority in parliament to pass a constitutional amendment that could end Sulyok's presidency. And to me, that pretty much sums up Péter Magyar's first 60 days in power. He is so ruthless, and he's moving incredibly fast. Now, the thing is though, depending on who you ask, this is either a good thing, dismantling the final remnants of Orbán's system, or a worrying use of Magyar's new supermajority. But honestly, so far, I do really like what I'm seeing. But more about that in the opinion section at the end of the video. Because first, we're going to review Péter Magyar's incredible first 60 days in power in 3 categories. The massive de-Orbanization, the democratic reform he's currently undergoing, and finally, as we are EU made simple, Hungary's big EU reset. But before we go into all of that, a quick word from our sponsor, Ground News, who actually also covered this story. And the way Ground News works is pretty simple, but very effective. It collects all of these different news articles covering the very same story and puts the different perspectives in one place. So, for example, let's have a look at the story about Hungary's parliament ousting the president. So as you can see here, 141 articles are actually reporting on this story. And you can see a biased distribution here with all of these different news agencies or news outlets. And further below, you can see all of these articles listed, left-leaning ones, center ones, and the right ones. And it's quite interesting because sometimes these titles are very biased. But my favorite feature by far is this thing right here called bias comparison. Because when I click on this, it gives me an overview what the left is saying and what the right is saying. So for example, the left is quite aggressive in its terminology, saying it's a blow to the Orbán system and stressing anti-autocratic cleanup and also using words like puppet and marionette. Anyway, this is why I really like Ground News. It brings articles from across the media landscape into one place, allowing you to compare how different outlets cover the very same story. And you can now get 40% off unlimited access to the Vantage plan by using my link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. Now, let's get back to the video and Péter Magyar's first 60 days in office, starting with the de-Orbanization. We've already talked about Magyar's attempt to remove President Sulyok, but he's far from the only high-ranking figure from the Orbán era that Magyar has targeted. There's the president of the Constitutional Court, Péter Polt. And rather than firing him directly, Magyar introduced a mandatory retirement age of 70 for Constitutional Court judges. And, well, you guessed it. Polt is over 70, so he and several other senior Orbán-era judges will now have to go. But perhaps the most symbolic example of this de-Orbanization is the media. Because, well, before Magyar, around 80% of Hungary's media was controlled by just one man, Orbán. And it had become a massive propaganda machine for his government. We were actually, as EU made simple, in Hungary on the ground during the election. And honestly, the sheer scale of Orbán's billboards and propaganda was absolutely incredible. A lot of anti-EU stuff too. Anyway though, fast forward to the 7th of July, just last week, and Hungary's main public news channel, M1, suddenly stopped broadcasting the news. And then M1 displayed a pretty incredible message. TV screens across Hungary went black with the following words. Public media cannot lie. We apologize that we nevertheless did so for so long. And then later that day, the channel came back on air at exactly 1956. A deliberate reference to, of course, the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. It's pretty incredible marketing if you ask me. And to be fair, it's not just symbolic, because the old public media leadership is being replaced, and Magyar has introduced a law to completely restructure the system. So, at least on paper, the idea isn't to replace Orbán TV with Magyar TV, but to make public media actually independent. But, of course, removing the old system is one thing. What will Magyar actually replace it with? And that brings us to part 2 of this video, democratic reform. For starters, Magyar introduced a 2-term limit for prime minister. And that might sound pretty normal for many European countries out there. But in Hungary, after Orbán spent a combined 20 years as prime minister, this is a pretty massive change. In other words, it means Orbán can never run again, and neither can Magyar after 2 terms. And Magyar isn't just stopping there. Members of parliament would also be limited to a maximum of 12 years in office. A pretty solid change too. And then, of course, there's the big one, corruption. And here, Magyar has, been very aggressive. His government has launched an anti-corruption campaign called Operation Purgatory. I mean, I do really love the dramatic name here. And as part of it, Magyar is creating a new independent National Asset Protection and Recovery Office. Okay, this name is definitely not as innovative, but the name does tell you exactly what it does. Find public money that was allegedly stolen or misused and try to get it back to the public. There's even an entire website right here that you can follow, which shows you exactly what they're doing and how they plan to return this money to the Hungarian public. Now, to understand why all of this is necessary, you only need to look at Orbán's childhood friend, Lőrinc Mészáros. Because Mészáros basically went from being a small-town gas fitter to becoming one of the richest people in Hungary. Actually, in fact, the world. He is now on number 834 on the Forbes billionaire list, which is, quite the career trajectory. And finally, Magyar wants to go even further. Rather than endlessly patching up the system Orbán left behind, he wants Hungary to write a completely new constitution. And the process is expected to begin this autumn, with public participation and eventually a national referendum. And then finally, coming to the third part of the video, there's Hungary's big EU reset. And perhaps the most symbolic moment came from day one I particularly enjoyed. The European Union flag returned to the Hungarian parliament. And just like the black TV screens, this wasn't supposed to be purely symbolic. Magyar immediately began repairing Hungary's relationship with Brussels. And after his government began introducing reforms, 16.4 billion euros in frozen EU funds were unlocked. But perhaps the biggest geopolitical shift really is Ukraine. For years, Orbán was one of the EU's biggest obstacles, regularly blocking decisions and maintaining what I feel were unusually close ties with Moscow. Magyar has now moved Hungary back towards the European mainstream, though, and the first clusters of Ukraine's EU accession negotiations have now finally been opened. That's a pretty dramatic shift for a country that, under Orbán, became most famous as the EU's permanent veto player. So, the message from the new government is very simple. Hungary is definitely not leaving Europe. Hungary is coming back. And so far, Hungarians seem to be rewarding it. Magyar is now even more popular than ever, even more so than during the election, as you can see in the approval ratings on the screen right now. So that brings me to what I think. Honestly, for just 60 days in power, that is a hell of a list. These are proper structural reforms that, as someone living here in Germany, I can only dream of. Now, of course, I also do realize that moving this quickly is a lot easier when you have a 2/3 majority in parliament and don't have to work with coalition partners. But crucially, though, that does raise one very important question. Is Péter Magyar dismantling Orbán's authoritarian system, or is it simply replacing it with its own? Because we do have to be honest here. Using a supermajority to change the constitution, push out senior judges you don't like, and potentially remove a democratically elected president, a president elected by the parliament, you can start seeing why some people might find that worrying. So I actually spoke to a Hungarian friend about this, and his perspective was very interesting. He told me that what he appreciates most about the new government is the transparency. That they're actually explaining what they are doing, why they're doing it, and where they want to go next. He also pointed out that the constitutional amendments were posted online, with the public given 5 days to submit comments and feedback. And the longer-term plan is to even create an entirely new constitution with public participation and eventually a referendum. So for him, there's a real feeling of being informed and involved in what the government is doing. And honestly, that sounds pretty good to me. Of course, promises are promises. We still have to see whether Magyar actually keeps them, and crucially, whether he can resist abusing the, let's be honest, enormous amount of power he currently has. But so far, I have to say, I love what I'm seeing. And I really hope other European leaders, Merz, Macron, are paying attention. Because bold action, transparency, and pragmatic politics, where you involve the people, are exactly what Europe needs right now. So, Péter Magyar, keep it up, man. And maybe teach the rest of Europe a thing or two. Thank you so much for watching. And if you do want to dig deeper into media bias and understand how stories are being framed, do check out our sponsor, Ground News. You can get the unlimited access Vantage plan with 40% off by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen right now. And as always, a special shout out to all of our presidents who make this all possible. Your support is invaluable. See you in the next video.